Hey community, welcome to our sermon podcast for wanderers, seekers, and thinkers, for deconstructing and reconstructing. This is a feed of Open Door Church, a faith community focused on God's love and grace, a progressive church built around action, community, and people. Enjoy this week's message and check back often as we're posting new content every week. We've been walking through our values or our threads. We're not really sure what we're calling them yet. But I like threads because we think about it as it sort of makes their way through our community and the way we think about things and the way we look at life and the way we think about the structures of church and different things like that. We come back to these threads that are part of all that. This is our fifth thread, and I should thank Stacy, who I don't see this morning, but is super awesome and has been creating these graphics for us. They're posters, but she's condensed down for the screen so that we have something up here on the screen. So we're excited to have those. At the end of the day, we'll have a whole set and we'll put them up somewhere and that sort of thing. She went super modern, simplistic. We're happy. It's cool. Things you do when you have a cool community, right? So the values, the reason we're talking about values the way that we are, and the reason that it's so significant is that we're kind of different in terms of how we do church. So I start with a question. What does it mean to be a church without a set of doctrines? This has been a central question at Open Door over the last several years as we attempt to create something that is pretty seldom found in our faith communities. It might actually be an attempt to redefine the definition of faith community, given that faith at ODC is used without a specific reference to those doctrines that define the faith. And so we have this strange place where we're trying to figure out, well, what is our community if we don't have that set of doctrines that tell us what that faith is? So we find this guiding light in the Christian scriptures, commonly the Old and New Testaments. Or the New Testament and the Jewish Tanakh. In those scriptures and in the life of Jesus, we have identified five values or threads with which we want to weave through the work and through the individuals and through the community of ODC. These values will sort of help us to hold a stanchion to the actions and the work of the church. So that we can ask the question, is this decision in line with our values? Is this program or is the structure of this program in line with our values? Does it honor and support the journey that people are on? Does it promote inclusion or is it inclusive in those who it reaches or how it is promoted? Does it break down our community or does it increase the inclusivity of all? Does it increase love and compassion in our church or in our community? Does it shed light on God's love? Does it subvert the status quo of power structures and systems of oppression? Does it move us toward the restoration of all things in God? So those are some really big questions. But when we think about how are we spending our money? What are we going to do with our time and our resources and this building? All of those questions lead us into a place where we say, okay, well, here's what we've identified that Jesus was doing every day in his ministry. And these are the things that we want to hold to life and to bring about. So we launched these values with the concept of journey. The Bible essentially opens with a scene of a man and a family called to a journey. God calls Abraham and says, go. And Abraham responds. And from there forward, the entire text almost completely is a story of journey. Different people, different communities, different places, some of them theological in the way that they're structured, some of them simply telling the story of this people. As that journey unfolds, we learn about the character and the desires of God for humanity and for all of creation. We see families and people's journey in and out of comfort and struggle, of power and tragedy, of community and brokenness, of life and death, of love and horrific acts of genocide. We see a journey away from God and toward God. This journey and these people mimic the lives that we lead still today in a sense of wandering, where we often find ourselves journeying toward the mountain or the place of God, metaphorically. Yet frequently we find ourselves exploring the woods, taking a nap in the meadows, or simply staring up at the clouds. We then moved our story to inclusion, then subversion, and then love. The unifying nature of these three alone should lead us radically into a life that lifts up the other, calls us to service and a deep desire to understand, to respect, and to know those we encounter every single day. And the last thread weaving through our community also acts to bring these things into relationship with one another. It's restoration. Restoration is difficult to package up, as it has a calling on our lives at so many different levels. So we're going to talk about it in a bunch of different ways, and it's hard, actually, to pinpoint. Kind of like our whole series on Shalom had to go in like all these different places. Restoration has a similar place in the text. So we're going to do our best this morning to have sort of a top-level kind of discussion. But like the others on this, it really deserves its own series. On a very personal level, the restoration of individuals frees us to love and to live with confidence, without the baggage of shame or pride or the need for power and control. In a very acute way, restorative work reaches into the lives of families and relationships to mend brokenness, to repair hurt and betrayal. At a local level, we can look out into Maple Ridge or your community, and we can speak of the divisions in our community and our efforts to bring restoration, to bring about peace and love, and in our case, to a city flailing in frustration and anger. Restoration, of course, also leans into God's ultimate work of bringing healing and restoration to humanity and to God, and even cosmically, as Paul writes, the restoration of all things, or when we speak of restoration of our earth, and we talk about taking better care and finding ways to heal this maybe irreversible path that our earth's journey is on. So, let's talk about restorative work. There's a group in Maple Ridge, an organization that works to do restorative work with teens and youth. Essentially, it's called Youth Diversion. And I served with Youth Diversion on their board for several years until we merged or amalgamated or whatever with another organization to help be sustainable long term. But I want to tell you about the organization because what they're doing brings light to what it means to be restorative. Restorative work in general is about bringing people together. In this case specifically, when a teen or youth gets into trouble in the community is maybe caught shoplifting or is fighting with kids at school or is caught vandalizing something or all different number of things that you can imagine that youth do on occasion. And what happens in this process is that the youth is given the option to come in and do this process through youth diversion rather than going through the court system. The court system, which is punitive and which says, okay, here's the consequence. Youth diversion says, okay, let's figure out how we can restore relationships with the community so that you can repair the damage that's been done, not just in the monetary or the physical way of maybe undoing the vandalism or returning the shoplifted goods or something like that, but in a very relational way of, okay, what does it mean when I harm my community, and how can I have conversations and relate to people in a way that they're able to have faith in youth and in our community after it's been broken. You ever had your house broken into? Car? Just one of us. Okay, it's fine. No, you didn't have to actually raise your hands. I get it. It's okay. You feel a sense of violation in that moment, right? Somebody's been through my personal belongings. I had my iPad is a very precious thing to me. It goes with me everywhere, and I take all of my notes on it. All of my sermons are here. It's all my books. Like, I try not to buy hard books anymore. So it's like a very personal device for me. A few years ago, I left it in the car. Not smart. I get it. My problem. And it disappeared overnight. And I didn't notice. I think it was a Saturday night. I didn't notice until showing up here. Like I said, this has my sermon. Without it, I don't know what's going on. Okay, and this occurred on Saturday night, and I show up on Sunday morning and get in the car, and things are rummaged through, and my iPad is missing, and probably that was it. I don't remember at the time, but it feels very personal when your things go through, and you lose a sense of your community in that moment. In that moment, I was angry at and distrusting of my community. Where I park my car every day, where I live and walk and breathe and play with my kids and coach baseball, all of those things happen in this same space, and now that space is violated and broken. Youth diversion is about restoring that broken relationship in the process. So when a kid does something, say like that, they actually will convene with staff from youth diversion, the person who is the victim in the scenario, the youth, and maybe their parents, and they talk about it. And they talk about what happened in that moment and how it made them feel and what their experience was, so that the youth has an opportunity to understand that and to feel and experience what that individual felt, and that person has an opportunity to share those experiences and to see remorse, hopefully, regret, and a desire to see that relationship changed. That is restorative work. I locked my iPad. It disappeared for 2 weeks. I get a phone call one day. This is not restorative, but I get a phone call one day and somebody says, hey, I bought this iPad on Craigslist. Of course, I'm still frustrated and angry. And so I'm like, yeah, sure. He says, when I try to log in, it says this iPad belongs to you, and it had your phone number. Do you want it back? And I said, yes, I do. He wanted money for it. Sure. Anyway, I got it back, lost nothing. They had wiped it. Long story short, everything seemed okay that time. The process of restorative work is about building and renewing those broken relationships. So when we read through the story of Jesus, we don't often have a lens toward what it means to do restorative work. But I think if you're in that community or if you're doing that kind of work and you read the story of Jesus as he walks from town to town, you have an idea of what Jesus is doing is restorative every single step of the way. And we talked a little bit about this when we talked about shalom, because shalom is that holistic peace, that understanding where all of the world comes together and is at peace with one another, both humanity and relationships and community and with our earth and us with God. Restorative work looks very similar and could probably be used interchangeably with that story of shalom throughout the gospel story. And so when we read the gospel story and when we see Jesus speaking with people and healing and first putting relationships back together with people that have lost those relationships and have lost their meaning in community, Jesus regularly is simply restoring life to people. So when we say we have this thread or this value of restoration, what we mean is we want to be about the business of restoring lives and people and relationships and communities. And it's hard work because it's not that exciting to sit in a room with somebody you've hurt or somebody that has hurt you and to have that conversation to restore and to renew that relationship. Those are hard conversations to do. That's part of our purpose and part of our role. I want to read a story from John chapter 4. Oh, it's my Bible too? Did I say that? Anyway. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John. Although it was not Jesus himself, but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee, but he had to go through Samaria. Now it's interesting that it's written this way. He had to go through Samaria. So we've talked about Samaria before. We're going to do a little bit more in a second. But generally, Jewish people did not walk through Samaria. It's kind of taboo. It's against the rules. What you would do is you would walk around because you don't want to interact with Samaritans. So the story of the Good Samaritan is bringing about this history, and so it's written this way. He had to go through Samaria, but really he didn't have to go through. He chose to go through, and that in itself is this subversive act of having us rethink the boundaries between humanity and the religious divisions that we've created, ethnic divisions that we've created. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." It's a bit abrupt, but we'll give him a pass. And the author puts a parenthetical note here that says, his disciples had gone to the city to buy food. We're going to get used to these parenthetical notes here. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Another parenthetical note. Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. So John's writing to a group who doesn't know this. Presumably, if Matthew's writing this, he doesn't have to include that note. John's writing to an audience that needs to know Jews and Samaritans don't get along. You're supposed to walk around. He didn't. He chose to go through. Then you're supposed to not share things with him. He doesn't care. He's asked her for a drink. She makes note of it, saying, how is it that you, a Jew, are asking me, a woman of Samaria, for a drink? We also have the male-female dynamic here. He's not supposed to be doing this. Everything is at odds here, okay? He's just bucking taboo everywhere we go. And Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. And the woman said to him, sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get the living water? Okay, living water here is spring water. He's sitting at a well. It is not spring water. It's a, you got to drop a bucket in. Spring water is very different. So our text has translated this as a living water, as a metaphorical spring water. You got to do that work on your own. They shouldn't be doing that for you. Anyway, she says, where do you get that living water? Because we're at a well, there's no spring. And he says, are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it? Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. And the woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water. And he said, go call your husband and come back. And she said, I have no husband. And Jesus said, you're right in saying that I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. And the woman said to him, sir, I see that you're a prophet. It goes on. Let's talk about what's happening here. So Samaritans, let's start there. Samaritans, so here's the division. Way back when Israel is being conquered and being exiled to different communities, the claim is that those who stayed, because they only took a certain percentage of people for exile, right? Those who stayed in Israel maintain their traditions to some degree. Those who leave Israel, we're talking about many years, right? So what happens when you take your community, your religious or any type of ethnic community, and you transplant them into another place and another location, is you start forming your own traditions in that place. If your entire tradition revolved around going to the temple and you can no longer go to the temple, you modify your traditions so that you can maintain your community and the boundaries and all of those things. We can go back to Jeremiah and enjoy some of that conversation about boundaries. That's different here. But in Israel, they stay there and they're able to maintain the traditions that they have in place. Or, again, this is the claim. And so when Israelites who have been in exile return to the land, they have now differing traditions that are butting up against each other in this storyline. And so the deep division that is created long term is that these Samaritans who stayed in the land and these exilic Israelites that have returned have this deep-seated confrontation with how they're supposed to go about doing and worshiping God. Fast forward a few hundred more years, and we get into this moment, and the divisions are so deep that they don't even identify with one another. They can't even be in the same place with one another. They can't share a bucket of water. They can't share even a location. You have to walk around. Jesus, in this moment, by walking through Samaria, by speaking to this Samaritan woman, by sharing this information, and we could say ministering to Samaritans, is doing restorative work. It is changing the way that they are called to relate to one another. So everything that they've been taught and raised to believe about the other is being shifted in this moment when Jesus walks through and asks for a drink of water. The restorative work is not done between those two communities. Jesus is also going to speak directly into this woman's life and talk about and help her to be set free from the weight that she's living under. Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. One of the major divisions between Samaritans is which place that they do their worship. You worship what you... Whatever. Oh, that means I'm out of time. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God in spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. We're talking about these divisions, but let me tell you that these divisions are useless, and there's a time coming when worship is worship. And we're going to do it together, and the divisions that we've set aside or set between us are null and void. That is restorative work in community and in this individual. Just like Nicodemus in chapter 3, he says, have you been baptized by the Spirit? And Nicodemus he says, unless you've been born from above, then you don't know God. And Nicodemus is like, well, how can anyone be born after having already grown old? Nicodemus responds with a very literal, and obviously Jesus is speaking in metaphorical terms, and he's speaking in a literal response. She does the same thing. He says, I'm going to offer you spring water, and if you would just ask. And she says, well, where do I get this spring water? And how is it different than this well water? And he's like, no. You're missing the whole point. Because the God that I am calling you to is bigger than our religious traditions. And we can find in us a weight being lifted from the social statuses that we find ourselves in and find it in the love of God. Every single piece of this story is about restoration. Communities, individuals. We have an opportunity to live out what Jesus practiced. And we can watch from the sideline and wait for a future moment and a future day. But right here, we have an opportunity to get our hands dirty and do the restorative work in our own lives, but also in our communities, also in our church. Most of what we are focused on right now, no, that's not even true. Much of what we're doing right now is about building relationships, because in those relationships, we're able to find a place where we can see differences, restore individuals, and find life through those relationships. When we go to a Need Place, like I mentioned earlier, and I think I did the same during the Shalom series, but what I have found so fascinating is that just by setting out chairs, the dynamic of what we do changed. And obviously with Anita Place and all of that, things have changed anyway. But rather than setting up a table and standing on the other side of it and serving across, when we set up chairs and we offer food and we sit down next to one another, community is restored. Something that has been taken from people that live on the street is that they don't interact with most of our community in a way that is healthy or whole or complete. And in that moment of sitting and sharing and talking, we find ourselves restoring community. And in the process, restoring individuals. That's God's work. That's why this is one of 5. And it's actually why when we were working toward a vision statement, restoration came up as one of the top pieces. We eventually gave up because it was too big, it was too difficult, we struggled. But we find that in these values, as they relate with one another, we find that stanchion of here's what we're doing, here's what we're striving for, here's where we're headed, here's what community in God looks like. Let's close with a prayer. God, we're thankful to be here with you and with one another. Restorative work is hard, and we see that in the stories and the narratives of the scriptures that you've given us. We see that that in our own lives that we carry so much baggage. That it's hard for us to understand what a restored life looks like sometimes. We see that in our relationships, we struggle to make amends when things are broken. We struggle with the weight of pain and hurt and frustration and anger that gets in the way of our own willingness to step in and forgive and to let go, to be present in the lives of those around us. We find that our own pride and hubris and desire for control prevent us from understanding others, from accepting others, from putting others ahead of our own desire. We ask that you can lead us in this, that you can guide us, that we can do this together, that we can support one another through this church, through these relationships, and bring wholeness and restoration. That where we go, we leave a wake of love and restoration behind us. We love you. We pray in your Son's name. Amen. Thanks for listening to this sermon podcast from Open Door Church. Our intro and outro music was created by Lee Rosevear and is used under a Creative Commons by attribution license. Have a great week. Ask the hard questions and explore God's love. Everyone is always welcome to join the journey with us at Open Door. Learn more at opendoorfamily.ca. That's opendoorfamily.ca.